Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Inside the Birds TV with Jeff Mosher and Adam Kaplan, presented by DraftKings. And with the Eagles at 3-5-1 and in search of a lot of answers to their season, we're very excited to bring back former Bills and Colts general manager Bill Polian, a six-time NFL Executive of the Year, a Super Bowl champion, and also a podcast host now. He is host of the Inside Football with Bill Polian podcast, which is available on any podcast platform. And, of course, you can hear him on Sirius XM NFL Radio. Bill has joined us in the past. Bill, last time you were on with us, I believe you were out in the Cape. It was nice. The weather was good. The Eagles were looking like a team that was going to be competitive, and here we are. The Eagles are not very competitive right now, and their season's kind of spiraling here. So I think what we'll start off with asking you, just in your experience, you know, you've been the GM of several teams, and you've seen the ebb and flow of a season. When you have things that are going wrong, and it's more than one thing, how hard is it to get it all back on track?
Well, it's not easy. I think first of all, you assess the situation, and you get down to the basics. And the basics of this are that the Eagles are 3-5-1, but the winner of the AFC East is going to host a playoff game and go to the playoffs. So NFC East, excuse me. So that's the goal. That's the only goal. Nothing else counts. So that's number one. That's the way you frame it with the players. Nothing else counts. Don't listen to anything else. Don't worry about power rankings. Don't worry about seedings. Don't worry about it. Just let's win the conference, the division, I should say. That's the bottom line. So I'm sure Coach Peterson has already done that with them, framed that with them. Secondly, as Tony Dungy often said, when things go wrong, do less. So in terms of X's and O's, in terms of preparation, in terms of making sure their minds are clear and they know what their assignments are in every single situation, do less. Sometimes that even involves less practice. Because the team might be worn out mentally or physically or banged up, in terms of injuries, which the Eagles have been obviously on the offensive line. Now that is almost non-negotiable now because everyone will be going to the enhanced COVID protocols. So meetings will all be virtual, practices will be limited, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of that takes care of itself. It's not ideal, but for a team that's struggling, it's not a bad thing because many times coaches, particularly assistant coaches, want to do more. You know, when things go bad, let's do more. Let's put in more plays. You know, let's work harder. And really, in reality, you're working against yourself. You're going downhill. So then you turn to the individual players. And with the individual players, you have to remind them, both as a position coach, the general manager, the scouts can help, all the football people can help in discussions with the players and say, look, focus, keep your eye on the target, which is winning the division. Don't think about anything else. Second of all, when things go wrong, do less. Don't put more burdens on your shoulders than you need to have. Go back to the basics. So if you're a quarterback, if you're Carson Wentz, let's work on the footwork. Let's work on the timing. Let's work on the routes that your guys run best. Let's get that perfected. And the more you do that, the better base you build and the less the outside noise and the pressure creeps in. And to show you how it works, I think it might have been 2 games or 3 games before the end, the year that we won the Super Bowl in Indianapolis, we went down to Jacksonville and they ran for 275 yards on us. And when we got on that plane to go home, it was the season had ended. You know, it was over. If you asked every player on that team, what's happening, pack your bags, it's over, we lost. And naturally, that's all we heard in the media. And Tony said to me on the plane going home, we're going to be fine. We need to make one change with the defense personnel-wise, which we did do. We talked about that on the plane home and the following morning and made that change. And then he told the team, we're going to do less, not more. And we're going to get the defense right, and this is not going to happen again. And away we went. We ended up winning the Super Bowl. So it works. That approach works.
Bill, speaking of that approach, coming out of a bye, the self-scout, how important is the self-scout for a coaching staff?
Well, it's important, but I think you want to be sure that what you're doing is not getting into a discussion about what's best or what isn't best, but looking at hard reality. Are we running, if we've got a passing concept that we really like against cover 2 and it isn't working, let's find out why. Don't throw it away, but don't say, well, we got to work harder on this. Let's find out why it isn't working. Is it the personnel? Should we change personnel? Should we change alignment? Maybe the design isn't good. Maybe the quarterback doesn't feel comfortable with it. Maybe we can't protect it. It might require longer amounts of protection than we can provide because of injuries. That's what you do with the self-scout. Not that most people think, well, we're running this play too much and that play not enough. That's really not the case. It's a question of how, not why, but not how, but why.
Before we continue, I want to tell everyone to download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app today and use code ITB for a special offer when you sign up. That's code ITB for a special offer when you sign up only at DraftKings Sportsbook. So you're talking about your time with Tony Dungy. You spent time in Buffalo, obviously, with Marv Levy, another great coach. You've been around a lot of good head coaches, Bill. I'm curious in your observations of how you've seen your head coaches coach their assistant coaches. How important is that concept of a head coach coaching his assistants and making sure everybody's on the same page to having a successful product every Sunday?
It's really important. Now, a lot depends on the makeup of the staff, too. When we were in Buffalo, we had veteran coaches, by and large, and we'd been together, some of us back to our days in Montreal with Marv. So everyone in that organization, and certainly on that coaching staff and in the football part of the organization, knew each other, understood what Marv wanted, bought into Marv's philosophy. We had one or two guys who joined late, and one of them proved to be a problem, and we got that rectified over time. So that part of it was relatively easy. Now, when Tony came to Indianapolis, he kept Tom Moore and Howard Mudd, who were the linchpins of the offensive staff, brought Jim Caldwell in to coach Peyton Manning, which was really a great thing. Added Frank Reich essentially as an intern coach, and on the defensive side of the ball, brought in Leslie Frazier, John Tierling, a whole bunch of guys that knew Tampa 2 and believed in Tampa 2. So we were all on the same page in terms of how we handled the X's and O's. So he didn't have to do a whole heck of a lot on the X's and O's. And when we hit the biggest bump in the road, which was the tragic death of his son, Tony's son, Jim Caldwell was already the assistant head coach. And so he just simply took over, and it was as smooth a transition as you could find until Tony came back. It was about a 3-week period of time until Tony came back. Now, interestingly enough, the loss of James affected our players greatly. I mean, he was a peer. He was 19, 20 years old. He was around all the time. They knew him from training camp, et cetera, et cetera. He was friends with a lot of them. So that hit them harder than I think maybe we realized until we got into the playoffs. So that's just a byproduct of it. But now when Peyton went down and we had to essentially change the whole offense, Jim had a difficult task, and he pulled it off, by the way. He did a really great job of it. But he had to coach the coaches, and some he had to coach hard. Mm-hmm. Because not that they didn't want to win. They became paralyzed because they said, oh my heavens, we no longer have Peyton Manning. What are we going to do? It's that we all know that feeling when you're faced with what looks like an insurmountable problem. You sit there and say, oh my heavens, what are we going to do? So he did a phenomenal job getting through that. But it's a difficult task. So I gave you a long answer. The short answer is, when things are really rough, that's when the head coach has to step in and coach the coaches. Basically speaking, they're all prepared to do what they have to do during the season. But when things get rough, whether it's with an individual player, a department, or the entire team, the head coach has to step in and say to the coaches, this is what I want done. This is how we're going to do it. And essentially, he'll give the same message to everybody.
Bill, and you were talking about Peyton Manning. Well, let's move to Carson Wentz. This is the guy that everybody looks at. The team is 3-5-1. He has not had a particularly good season. You've watched him. What are the reasons for the struggles, and what could be done to get him to the level they need him to get to so this team could win the NFC East?
Well, let's go back to what we talked about at the beginning. Let's go back to the basics. Let's make sure that his footwork is good. Let's make sure that his timing is good, that if it's a 3-step drop, he's on time. If it's a 5-step drop and hitch, he's on time. If it's a 7-step drop and the protection isn't synced up with it, or you can't protect it, then you have to sit down as part of the self-scout and say, hey, maybe we have to scrap this. We don't have the capacity to get this done. Because you're a captive as a coaching staff, and as individual players, you're a captive to what's around you. So if you're playing with, 3 of your 5 offensive linemen out, including 2 of your tackles, which has happened to the Eagles this year on more than a few occasions, you may have to adjust what you do in the passing game, because you say, well, we can't protect them that long. We can't throw it down the field. Yeah, we know he wants to throw it down the field, and we know Rager can go and get it, and it's fun to watch, but can we protect it? Those are issues that the coaching staff has to deal with, and they have to deal with it. The quarterback coach principally and the offensive coordinator have to deal with him on it and say, look, this doesn't look good in this game plan this week because we don't think we can protect this thing. So maybe we got to do a little more of this and a little more of that. Every quarterback has his security blankets. Everyone does. And a lot of times the public doesn't even know who it is. In this case, once Carson gets the tight ends back, he's going to be a different quarterback, because that's the linchpin to his those are his security blankets. Mm-hmm. And that's a bad term. I don't mean to, you know what I mean? That's not pejorative. It's those are the guys that's his bailout guys. Those are the guys that he knows are going to get open, that can run routes that he's comfortable with. That's a better term than security guy. Those are his go-to guys, his bailout guys. Things go wrong, I can't protect it. Boom, let me go to Ertz. Cam Newton did that for years with Olsen in Carolina. I mean, you could sit there and watch and say, okay, the deep one isn't open. That's what he wants first. Secondly, the guy in the flat isn't open. He's not there. Okay, Olsen, boom, right? It never failed. So once those guys get back, the offense will take on a completely different character, because they haven't been there. To my recollection, yours is far better than mine, but I don't think they've been there together for the whole season, have they?
Yeah, I mean, Goddard just got back a couple weeks ago. He's been blocking a lot, and because Goddard got hurt very early in the season, then Ertz got hurt. Yeah, it's I guess it's definitely a factor. Just one little quick follow-up, though. When you watch Wentz, though, from a mechanical standpoint, or just as an overview, what do you think has been wrong with him, just from a performance standpoint, from your eyes?
Well, first of all, I don't know the mechanics well enough to tell you. I mean, unless I'm on the practice field every day, I'm a jerk to comment on that.
Gotcha.
You got to know what the coaches are teaching. But from my perspective as an observer, as a one that's been around quarterbacks and been around seasons like this, he's pressing. He's trying to make too much happen. He's playing. I said this to Peyton when he was a rookie. Don't play with clenched teeth. Don't do that. Relax. Take a deep breath. Recognize that things are going to go wrong, and they invariably do, and we'll overcome them. Don't play with clenched teeth. Have fun out there. Cut it loose. Don't be afraid to make a throw, and don't play uptight. Well, Carson's playing with clenched teeth. He's trying to make. He's putting too much on his own back, and no one player can carry that. So you just have to help him get past that. But as I say, once the tight ends are back, and he's got two really good running backs. I mean, that's really a plus. That running back tandem is the best that he's had since he's been in Philadelphia. So I think so. You need to, he needs to use those weapons. And again, that's where the coaches can help. Say, okay, let's get the ball to the backs now. They've been out for a while, in and out of the lineup. Once everybody's back and healthy, the offense takes on another, not only another cast of characters, but another cast in terms of how it performs. And I think he'll be better. But he's just got to recognize that he can't do it all.
Is there anything, Bill, outside of play calls and injuries, right, and things that would make you press? Is there anything outside of that you've seen with quarterbacks in general that would make them suddenly regress to a point where they're just all of a sudden not what they used to be? I understand what you're saying with the injuries and not having your safety valve. I think quarterbacks in the league generally deal with that, and sometimes their play fluctuates. But is there anything that will cause such a regression that you wonder if something's going on with a guy, off the field or what's going on through the years?
Look, people talk about it all the time. I can't honestly tell you, other than Kerry Collins, who had some personal problems which led to off the field issues, which it was my fault for not recognizing soon enough and trying to rectify soon enough. I can't recall anybody else who was ever in that situation. And I don't think Carson's in that situation either, at least not from what I hear from people. So Kerry would be the only one. And had we recognized it earlier, we could have helped him earlier, and things might have been different in Carolina. Fortunately for Kerry, he left Carolina, went on to have a really good career, and led the Giants to the Super Bowl. So the moral to that story is that players ultimately become what they are. So Carson will be back. The only question is when and how. And the only question for Eagle fans and Eagle players and coaches is, how do we get to the playoffs? That's it, period. Case closed. Let's do enough to get there. That's the important part.
As a follow-up to that, is it hard, do you think, and again, not just for Carson, but quarterbacks in general, especially who may be struggling, to sometimes have to then, move to wide receiver while another quarterback comes in? They're trying to incorporate what Jalen Hurts does well at a time in which Carson himself is struggling, and you wonder if that interrupts the rhythm that Carson is trying to get and the straightening out that Carson's trying to do at the same time.
I don't necessarily think so, because don't forget that Carson staying in the game is a function of putting him in a position where he's a safety valve if this particular package that they've designed for Hurts doesn't work. I mean, he understands that they're not going to make a living off that package with Hurts. I mean, he's the guy, and that's that. And the same is true. Drew sometimes stays in the game. Other times he leaves the game in New Orleans. So he's not upset by it. It's the fact that they're running a different package. The Colts put Jacoby Myers in on the goal line last week after failing 3 times to knock it in from inside the 3 with the running backs. And Frank Reich brilliantly said, I've seen enough of these running backs. Jacoby, get in there and run a quarterback sneak. And he did, and they scored a touchdown. They had settled for field goals. They left 12 points on the field previously, and the game became a rout. So I don't think, Philip might have been surprised by it. Didn't look like it was. I was watching a game on television, but he understood what Jacoby was in there for. And I'm all for having a package for Jacoby. I think that's a great idea. You got to find ways to win. Bill Parcells famously said, and Bill Belichick echoes and practices every single day, there is a way to win every game. You just have to find it. And lots of times it's unorthodox, and the players need to understand that.
Bill, one follow-up on the Wentz situation. we know that this offseason, there was really no offseason, the Eagles did bring in new coaches. And sometimes, there's a concern when you bring in new coaches and you're bringing new concepts or just ideas, maybe it's too much. Is that a fair thing to bring up and to discuss about what maybe this has played into Wentz, maybe thinking a little bit out there where you're talking about kind of turning it loose a little bit? Maybe there's been a lot of voices in his head. I've been asked this, and I figured I might as well ask it to you.
Well, I can't say because I'm not there. I'm not on the ground every day. When I was with the Bills and with the Panthers and the Colts, I was at virtually every practice. So I could answer the question honestly and forthrightly. I don't know with respect to the Eagles, except I will say this. When you bring a new coach in at any position, you want to make sure that he has a lot of time with the guys in the off-season program. So, for example, when you bring a new coach in on the offensive line and he's teaching new techniques, you want to spend a lot of time with the offensive linemen in OTAs in the off-season program, making them familiar, making them understand what it is that you want them to do and why. So that was not possible this year. So whoever came in new didn't have the time, except virtually, to go through, and which is not as good as in person. I mean, we know that. And nobody's complaining about it. We got to get the games played, and COVID is COVID. But the idea that virtual learning is as good as in-person learning has been proven wrong throughout all of education. My daughter's a teacher, and she understands those things, and it's not the best way to do it. So, bottom line, it was a difficult offseason. If you're making changes in the offseason, it makes it all the more difficult. Now, having said that, how could Doug have known that COVID would come along? I mean, no one had any inkling of that. So the fact of the matter is that it's not ideal. Is it contributing to some of what's gone on? Probably. I mean, look at Daniel Jones in New York. Who better to coach him than Jason Garrett, right? No. How do the Cowboys look now after Jason Garrett's gone, right? But Daniel Jones was suffering the same way. I mean, he didn't have an off season with Jason Garrett to work on all the things that were, that you can work on one-on-one. You just can't do virtually.
Bill, we like asking you these questions, right, through an Eagles lens based on what's going on with them, but really through your experiences, because as you say, you're not there, you're not calling the shots, you're not seeing everything on a day-to-day basis. So with the Eagles in mind, I do ask you this question as a GM who has been responsible for building different rosters for different coaches and different schemes. I imagine that you always had for whatever scheme you were drafting for, you had positions that you prioritized and positions that you didn't prioritize as much. I wonder if you've ever had a situation where at the end of a year or even in the middle of it, you thought, okay, it's one thing to not maybe prioritize this position as much, but that doesn't mean maybe we didn't address it the way we should have. Okay, you have your pecking order, but you can't necessarily take the positions that you don't prioritize over the other and just kind of leave them bare, so to speak. Have you had that? Have you felt that way either during or after a season?
Yeah, you bet. After the season, I was fired. What position did we leave bare? Backup quarterback.
Sure.
And faced, if I'm correct, we faced the alternative was drafting Anthony Costanzo or the Red Rifle. I think that was the choice. Mm-hmm. I could be wrong on that, but there was a quarterback there that we felt had a chance to grow into a backup quarterback. But replacing Tarek Glenn at left tackle with a team that was, in fact, playing for the Super Bowl every year was the priority. And so I, personally responsible for it, left the backup quarterback in the hands of a young player who wasn't capable of handling it. We should have had a veteran, as we had throughout the period of time that we'd been there, and it didn't work out, and it cost everybody their job. So And I'm very fortunate that I got a gold jacket after that debacle. But beyond that, I feel terrible about all the people that lost their jobs. So, I mean, that general managers make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. If you can rectify it while you're in the process of playing the season, by all means, you should. We didn't. And actually, when Peyton got hurt, we brought Kerry Collins in. And unfortunately, and he would have been fine, but unfortunately he got hurt, and a concussion ended his season. But it only proves when things go bad, they continue to go bad.
Sure.
That's
sure.
an axiom too.
Right. And to fill in the blank, I'm clearly talking about, and Adam and I have discussed a lot about what the Eagles have done at linebacker position. They've never made it a top priority to use a first-round pick or spend $1 billion, but right now they're trying to put a formidable defense on the field. And their two nickel linebackers, they're basically their starting linebackers, are one's a rookie free agent from a year ago, and the other one was a Canadian Football League player. So neither of them are drafted, and so they're feeling the crunch of that right now. So that was the perspective.
Well, that's a little bit different story. Because particularly on defense, which is reactive, you have parameters for every player. Mm-hmm. And you prioritize parts of the defense that are indispensable and other parts that either through playing time, because if you're a nickel linebacker, you're playing about 55% of the time, and or necessity in terms of pass coverage ability and things like that. You can go off the beaten path for those players. We did. You probably don't remember the name. Indianapolis fans do. A guy named Cato Jr.
Oh yeah, from Michigan.
Oh, yeah. Linebacker. Us, right?
Yeah.
He was a converted college safety who I think we drafted in the 6th round or something like that. Antoine Bethea, we drafted in the 6th round. He was a college 3-deep free safety. Never played anything else. So that's a different story. You're not neglecting the position. You're just going about it in a different way because you only have so many draft choices and so much free agency money to spend. And the free agency money obviously has to be spent up front. That's where the defense. And I know the Eagles' defense well enough to know that that's where the priorities are.
Bill, one more thing I got to talk to you about because we've been asked this a lot, and there's never been any great answer for it because it's hard to bench your quarterback considering what they're paying him per season, and we know how talented Wentz is. But at what point, as a general manager, in this case would be Howie Roseman, do you say to Doug Peterson, "Hey, listen, do we need to consider benching our quarterback for one game just to get his head right?" I don't know if we're there yet, but is there a point in your career that you went to your head coach and said, "You know what, we need to start talking about this"?
No, never.
You've been great, had great quarterbacks, yeah.
Well, I've been fortunate to be around great quarterbacks, yeah. But still, that's really in this day and age, even back in the day, that's a tall order, and I don't know how much good you do with it. Ted Marchibroda taught me when I first came in pro football. He said, "Look, inside the building, we'll correct the quarterback. We'll work with him. We'll do all we can to make him successful, and we'll hold him accountable if he's not. And you have to be part of that as the general manager. But outside the building, he's never wrong. And here's why. Because, yes, they get too much credit when you win, but B, they get all the blame when you lose. And that's a heavy load to carry. So our job is to make sure that while we try to make him the best player we can, that we always support him and we never put him in a position where he's ridiculed or where he feels less than really 100% supported. And that's proven to be, I followed that every step of the way in my career. And so to bench the guy, I don't know that it does a lot of good in the end in this environment. You put a target on his back if you do that.
Bill, we can't thank you enough for joining us. And I really enjoy tapping into, all the experience that you've had with different coaches, different schemes, to be able to kind of relate to, what might be going on in Philadelphia right now. Really appreciate you coming back. And I know I said this last time and it came out to be true. We hope you join us down the road again, maybe at the end of the season or in the off season.
Look forward to it. Good to be with you.
Right.
Good Thanksgiving.
What's coming up next? Yourself as well. What's coming up next on Inside Football with Bill Pølian?
We're going to do the top quarterbacks in the league. We did the bottom 16 last week, and in this coming episode, which will air, last week's episode is airing right now. The new one will be up on Monday, I believe. We'll be doing the top 16 quarterbacks in the league, breaking them down and talking about the numbers and what the numbers mean and things of that nature.
Now, is that from just a performance standpoint, or is that just the way they're playing this season? How are you ranking them?
Just the way they're playing this season.
Okay, gotcha.
Hey, here's what the numbers mean. Okay. Carson's case, for example, to give you a little preview, he's at 58.4% completion. That's not good enough, and so that tells you that, hey, something's not clicking here.
Mm-hmm.
And the QBR is 73.2. And the reason it isn't clicking is because the interceptions and touchdowns are 12 and 12, and that's not Carson, and that's not the Eagles' offense. And so the numbers tell you that something's amiss here.
Mm-hmm.
That's the point, rather than subjective criteria, which he doesn't look like himself, and he's pressing.
Right. Sure.
They're not doing this, and he's not doing that. Well, okay, let's find out why. So that's the whole premise of the show.
Sure. Well, we encourage everybody to find out where you ranked Carson Wentz by going back and listening to Inside Football with Bill Polian, both the most recent one and the one that's going to be coming out. And, of course, you can hear him on Sirius XM NFL Radio. He is 6-time NFL Executive of the Year, a Super Bowl champion. Bill Polian, everybody. Thanks for joining us, Bill. And for everyone, we will catch you on the next episode of Inside the Birds TV.